I didn't find out my marriage was over through a confession or a fight. I found out because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating while I was sitting in a hospital parking lot, staring at a voicemail I wasn't supposed to hear. It was late, close to midnight, the kind of hour where even the city feels tired. My mother was inside, asleep after another round of tests, and I was killing time in my car, scrolling without really looking. That's when the notification popped up. A voicemail. From my wife. Sent an hour earlier. But I hadn't missed a call from her. I was sure of it. I tapped it without thinking. At first, there was just noise. A door closing. Music somewhere in the background. Then her voice. Soft. Careful. The way she used to sound with me. Back when things still felt private. I can't talk long, she said. He's right here. My chest tightened. I told myself it could be anyone. A coworker. Her sister. Anyone but the person my mind was already building in silence. Then she laughed. Not a big laugh. A small one. Intimate. I know, she said. I miss you too. The message cut off there. I sat in that car for a long time after it ended. The engine was off, but the dashboard lights were still glowing, like the car was waiting for me to decide something. I replayed the message again and again, each time hoping I'd hear something different. Each time hearing exactly what I didn't want to hear. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't drunk dialing. It wasn't harmless. It was careful. It was chosen. When I finally drove home, the house was dark. Her car was gone. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quiet everything felt. Not empty. Just done. We'd been married 7 years. No kids. No big scandals. From the outside, we were stable. The kind of couple people pointed to and said, they've got it figured out. What people didn't see were the small gaps that had been growing between us for a long time. Missed dinners. Conversations that stayed on the surface. The way she started turning her phone face down. I didn't confront her that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. Instead, I started noticing things. Patterns I'd ignored because it was easier to believe we were just busy. She stopped asking when I'd be home. She stopped telling me where she was going. When I talked about my mom's health, she nodded, but her eyes were somewhere else. On our anniversary, she texted me that she was stuck late at work. I ate takeout alone at the kitchen counter and told myself we'd celebrate another day. We never did. A week later, I checked the phone bill. I didn't even feel guilty. I felt calm. Like I already knew what I was going to find. Long calls. Repeated numbers. Late night timestamps. One number stood out. I didn't recognize it, but something about how often it appeared made my stomach drop. I didn't call it. I didn't text it. I just stared at it until it felt burned into my brain. The next time she came home late, I watched her instead of asking questions. She moved through the house like a guest. Quiet. Efficient. Already gone in her head. That was when I understood something that hurt more than the voicemail. She hadn't betrayed me all at once. She'd been leaving in pieces. And I'd been standing right there, holding the door open without realizing it. I slept on the couch that night. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. And for the first time since I'd heard that message, I didn't feel confused. I felt steady. Like something inside me had finally stopped trying to fix what wasn't broken, just finished. That was the beginning. Not the end. The beginning of seeing my life for what it really was. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not my friends. Not my sister. Not even my mom when she woke up asking why I looked so tired. I said work was stressful. That was true, just not in the way she thought. At home, my wife acted normal enough that it almost fooled me. She asked if I'd eaten. She complained about traffic. She kissed my cheek before bed. But there was no weight behind any of it. It was like watching someone rehearse a role they were already done playing. I started paying attention to the quiet moments. The pauses before she answered simple questions. The way she smiled at her phone, then cleared her face before looking up at me. I noticed how she showered as soon as she got home, like she needed to wash something off. Or someone. One evening, while she was cooking, her phone buzzed on the counter. She was across the room, and for a second, she didn't notice. I wasn't trying to spy. I didn't even move closer. But the screen lit up, and I saw a name I didn't recognize. Just a first name. No last name. No photo. The message preview disappeared before I could read it, but the damage was already done. She turned, saw me looking in that direction, and froze. Not long. Just long enough. Can you check the oven? She said quickly. I did. The food was fine. Everything was always fine on the surface. That night, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles above us. I thought about the man behind that name. I wondered if he knew she was married, or if he thought I was already out of the picture. Maybe emotionally, I was. The next morning, she told me she had to travel for work. 2 days. Short notice. She used to ask how I felt about trips like that. Now she just stated it, like a fact that didn't need agreement. I nodded, told her to have a safe flight. After she left, I sat alone in the house and listened to the silence. I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. The couch where we used to watch movies. The dining table where conversations had slowly died. Our bedroom, still made, still shared, but no longer intimate. I opened the closet. Her side was full. Mine looked untouched, like I was already the one who had moved out. That afternoon, the hospital called. My mom's test results were in. Nothing definitive. More waiting. More uncertainty. I drove there again, sat in the same parking lot, and felt the weight of everything pressed down at once. I realized something sitting there. I had been showing up for everyone. For my job. For my family. For my marriage. And somehow, I was the only one doing it. When my wife didn't call that night, I didn't reach out. I didn't ask where she was or how the trip was going. I let the distance stretch. It felt strange at first. Then it felt honest. The next day, I checked the bank account. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because I wanted to understand my own life again. That's when I noticed a charge I couldn't place. A hotel. Not near the airport. Not near her office. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the app. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad the way I thought I'd be. What I felt was something closer to resolve. Like the pieces were finally lining up, not to break me, but to show me the truth I'd been avoiding. When she came home the following evening, she hugged me tight, too tight, asked about my mom, told me the trip was exhausting. I listened. I nodded. I said all the right things. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. The shift didn't make me reckless. It made me quiet. I stopped trying to catch her in lies. I didn't need proof anymore. What I needed was understanding, not of what she was doing, but of who I had become while it was happening. Days passed, then weeks. We moved around each other like roommates with shared history. We talked about groceries and bills and the weather. We avoided anything that required honesty. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. My meeting had been canceled, and I didn't bother texting her. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was there. That wasn't strange. What was strange was the unfamiliar car parked across the street. Engine off. Windows dark. I told myself it belonged to a neighbor. We'd lived there long enough that new faces still felt like intrusions. I went inside and found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, fully dressed, shoes on. She jumped when I closed the door. "You're home early," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "You too." She nodded too fast, stood up, walked toward the kitchen, then stopped like she'd forgotten why she was going there. "I was just about to head out," she said. "Okay." That was it. No argument. No suspicion voiced. She grabbed her keys and left. As I watched her drive away, the car across the street pulled out seconds later and followed. I stood there in the doorway until both were gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't drink. I didn't spiral. I just sat at the table and let the reality settle in fully, without resistance. It was strange how calm it felt when I stopped pretending. The next morning, I called in sick. Then I drove to the storage unit my parents had rented years ago. Inside were boxes of old paperwork, warranties, tax forms, bank statements, things no one thought about until they mattered. My dad had always been meticulous. He'd labeled everything in black marker. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed grounding. Something solid. That's when I found it. A folder with my mother's maiden name on it. Inside were documents I'd never seen. Accounts, signatures, a bank card, expired, taped to the inside. I sat on the concrete floor and read every page slowly. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't hidden in a criminal way. It was old, thoughtful, a safety net my parents had set up decades ago, long before I met my wife. An account meant to stay untouched unless things went wrong. Things had gone wrong. I drove straight to the bank. Not the branch near our house. A different one. Quieter. The kind with wood desks and low voices. The teller was polite. Professional. Then she saw the account. Her smile faltered. She excused herself and came back with a manager. I waited. Come again. Steadier than I'd felt in months. They asked questions. Verified identities. Made phone calls. Nothing dramatic. Just careful. Serious. When they finally confirmed the balance, my breath caught. Not because of the number itself, but because of what it represented. Time, planning, protection. On the drive home, I realized something important. I wasn't trapped. I never had been. I'd just been loyal to the wrong silence. That evening, my wife asked me if something was wrong. She said it casually, like small talk. I looked at her and almost laughed. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. No, I said. I'm just thinking. And for the first time, that was true. Thinking changed the way I moved through the days. I started noticing how often she asked questions she didn't really want answers to. "How are you okay?" was just a phrase, not concern. I answered the same way every time. "Yeah, I'm fine." And she accepted it with relief. I began staying out later after work. Not to spy, not to follow her, just to be away from the house. I sat in diners, drank coffee I didn't need, watched people who looked tired but honest. It felt grounding to be around strangers who weren't pretending with me. One night, she didn't come home at all. She texted around midnight. Said she'd crashed at a friend's place because she'd had too much wine. I read it, set the phone down, and went to sleep. In the morning, her side of the bed was untouched. When she finally came back late the next afternoon, she walked in like nothing had happened. Tossed her bag by the door. Asked if I wanted Thai for dinner. I looked at her for a long moment. Not angrily. Not accusingly. Just really looked at her. At the woman I'd married. At the woman standing in front of me now. "Sure," I said. During dinner, she talked about work. About someone in her office who annoyed her. About a show she wanted us to start watching together. I listened. I nodded. I even smiled once or twice. But inside, something else was happening. I was detaching. Not in a dramatic way. More like loosening a knot that had been too tight for too long. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I opened her laptop. I didn't have to guess the password. I still knew it. That fact hurt more than anything I found afterward. Her email was open. I didn't read everything. I didn't need to. One thread was enough. Months of messages. Familiar language. Shared jokes. Plans disguised as coincidence. What surprised me wasn't the intimacy. It was the tone. She sounded lighter with him. Freer. Like someone who wasn't weighed down by expectation or history. I closed the laptop before she came out of the bathroom. I didn't confront her. I didn't screenshot anything. I didn't feel the urge to expose or explode. What I felt was finality. The next day, I met with a lawyer on my lunch break. I chose one with good reviews and a quiet office. I told him everything calmly, like I was describing someone else's life. He listened, asked practical questions, gave practical answers. When I walked out, the air felt different, like I'd crossed an invisible line. That weekend, I visited my mom again. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, fragile, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You look lighter," she said. I almost laughed. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, old neighbors, nothing heavy. Before I left, she reached for my hand. "Whatever you're carrying," she said softly, "don't carry it alone." I squeezed her hand and nodded. At home that night, my wife fell asleep on the couch with her phone in her hand. A message notification lit up the screen. That same name. I didn't wake her. I gently placed the phone face down on the table and covered her with a blanket. Then I went into the spare room and started making a list in my head. Not of accusations. Not of demands. Of exits. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning peace. I didn't rush anything after that. Peace, I learned, doesn't like to be chased. I started organizing my life quietly. Not in obvious ways. In small ones that only I would notice. I changed direct deposits. Opened a separate checking account. Moved personal documents into a folder and stored it in the trunk of my car. It felt strange doing these things while still sharing a roof, still sharing meals, still pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. She noticed, of course. Not the details, but the distance. She asked fewer questions. Stopped suggesting plans. We existed side by side, orbiting the same space without touching. One evening, she asked if I still loved her. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was hard, but because it was late. "I care about you," I said after a moment. She nodded, like that was enough. Like she hadn't expected more. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. A few days later, the bank called again. This time, it wasn't routine. They wanted me to come in person. There had been activity on the old account. Not withdrawals. Inquiries. Someone had asked questions they weren't authorized to ask. I knew immediately who it was. At the branch, the manager spoke carefully. Explained policies. Assured me the funds were secure. Asked if there had been any recent changes in my personal circumstances. I said yes. I didn't elaborate. When I got home, my wife was already there, sitting at the table, hands folded, waiting. I went to the bank today, she said. I hung up my jacket slowly. Why? I asked. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she smiled. The practiced one. I was just curious, she said. About our future. There it was. Not guilt. Not fear. Calculation. I sat down across from her. That account, I said calmly, isn't ours. Her smile faltered. She asked questions then. Real ones. About balances. About access. About why I hadn't told her about it before. I answered only what was necessary. It's not part of this marriage, I said. Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. For the first time, she looked unsure. That night, she slept in the bedroom. I slept in the spare room. The wall between us felt permanent. The next morning, she packed a bag. Said she needed space. Said she was confused. Said she didn't know how we got here. I watched her from the doorway as she left. I'll call you, she said. I nodded. She didn't. Instead, 2 days later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. He said he wanted to talk. Said there had been misunderstandings. Said things had gone too far. I read the message once, then deleted it. I wasn't angry at him. He was just a symptom. That evening, I filed the paperwork. Quietly. Cleanly. No drama. As I signed my name, I felt something settle inside me. Not loss. Not relief. Closure. The kind that doesn't ask permission. After she left, the house felt larger than it ever had. Not empty exactly, just unfinished, like a place waiting to be redefined. I didn't rush to fill the space with noise or company. I let it stay quiet. The lawyer called a few days later to confirm the filing had gone through. No surprises. No pushback yet. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. I'd taken it down without thinking. The outline was still there, lighter than the rest of the paint. She finally called that night. Her name lit up my phone, and for a split second, my body reacted before my mind did. Old habits. Muscle memory. I answered anyway. She asked how I was doing. Told me she was staying with a friend. Said she was thinking a lot. I listened. Didn't interrupt. Then she said she missed me. The words landed flat. Not because they weren't sincere, but because they were late. I hope you're okay, I said. She went quiet. Then asked if we could meet. Just to talk. Coffee. Neutral ground. I told her I'd think about it. When we hung up, I felt steady. No rush. No pull. Just clarity. The next morning, I drove to the hospital early. My mom was awake, watching the news with the sound turned low. She smiled when she saw me, then frowned slightly, the way she always did when she sensed something I wasn't saying. You don't have to protect me, she said. I sat beside her bed and told her the truth. Not every detail. Just enough. That the marriage was ending. That I was okay. That I'd made a decision. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached for my hand again. Sometimes the bravest thing, she said, is leaving quietly. I stayed there longer than usual that day. When I left, I felt grounded, like I'd checked in with the part of myself that mattered most. That afternoon, I agreed to meet my wife. One conversation. For closure. For myself. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our places. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking. She looked tired. Older. Or maybe just more real. We talked about safe things at first. Work. Her friend's apartment. The weather. Then she asked if I'd really filed. Yes, I said. She nodded slowly. No tears. No anger. Just acceptance settling in. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said. I know, I replied. And I meant it. She asked if there was any chance we could fix things. Start over. Be honest this time. I looked at her and felt something unexpected. Gratitude. For what we'd been. And certainty about what we couldn't be again. No, I said gently. I'm done. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for months. When we stood to leave, she reached out, then stopped herself. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to stay in touch. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the finality sink in. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic fallout. No surprise visits or late-night messages. Just paperwork moving through the system and a slow adjustment to a new rhythm. I packed her remaining things into boxes and stacked them neatly in the garage. I didn't rush. Each item felt like a small goodbye. Not painful, just final. When I was done, the house felt more honest, even with the empty spaces. She sent a message asking when she could pick them up. We agreed on a time when I wouldn't be home. On the day she came, I drove to the coast. It was a few hours away, far enough to feel like distance. I walked along the shoreline, shoes in my hand, listening to the waves. I thought about nothing important and everything at once. When I returned that evening, the garage was empty. The house smelled different. Like her shampoo was finally gone. I opened windows and let the air move through. At work, people noticed the change. Not the divorce itself, but the way I carried myself. I spoke less. I listened more. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. One afternoon, my manager asked if I was interested in a position opening up in another department. More responsibility. More travel. A year ago, I would have said no without thinking. I asked for time. That night, I visited my mom again. She was stronger now, sitting up, teasing the nurses. She looked at me and smiled. "You're standing straighter," she said. I laughed. I didn't realize I wasn't. We talked about the future, about things that scared me, about things that didn't anymore. On the drive home, I realized I wasn't angry at my ex-wife. Not anymore. Anger would have tied me to her. I didn't need that. What I felt was gratitude for the lesson, even if it came wrapped in disappointment. A week later, I signed the final papers. The judge was polite, efficient, said a few words about moving forward. When it was done, I walked out of the courthouse alone and felt the sun on my face. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, exactly how I wanted it. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Nothing fancy, just something warm. I ate at the table instead of the counter. Took my time. I thought about the voicemail, the one that had started everything. It felt like it belonged to another life now. Before bed, I deleted it. Not because it hurt, because I didn't need proof anymore. After the divorce was finalized, I expected some kind of emotional aftershock. Regret, loneliness, a sudden urge to call her. None of that came. What came instead was space. Not just physical space in the house, but mental space. Mornings felt slower, cleaner. I stopped waking up with that tight feeling in my chest, the one I used to mistake for responsibility. I took the new position at work. It meant travel, different cities, hotels that all smelled the same, early flights and late meetings. A year ago, that kind of distance would have scared me. Now it felt like motion, forward motion. In one city, I sat alone in a bar after a long day, nursing a beer I didn't really want. The TV was on, muted, a game I didn't care about. Around me, people laughed, argued, lived. No one knew who I was or what I'd been through. I liked that. My phone buzzed. Her name. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. She didn't waste time. She said she was sorry. Not in a dramatic way. Just tired. Honest. She said she hoped I was doing well. Said she'd been thinking about how things ended. "I don't expect anything," she said. "I just wanted to say it." I thanked her. Meant it. We talked for a few minutes. No tension. No nostalgia. Just two people acknowledging something that was already over. When the call ended, I felt lighter. Like a final thread had loosened on its own. That weekend, I flew home to visit my mom. She was being discharged soon. Stronger than anyone had expected. We celebrated with bad hospital coffee and jokes about the food. As we walked slowly down the hallway, she squeezed my arm. "You found your footing again," she said. I smiled. I think I did. Back at the house, I made changes. Small ones at first. New sheets. Different furniture layout. I painted the spare room and turned it into an office. Each decision felt intentional. Mine. One evening, I found an old box in the garage I hadn't opened in years. Inside were things from before my marriage. Photos. Notes. A version of myself I'd forgotten. I didn't feel sad looking at them. I felt reintroduced. Later that night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of water, listening to the neighborhood settle down. The sky was clear. Quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel lonely. I thought about how close I'd come to staying in something broken just because it was familiar. How easy it would have been to ignore the signs. To keep choosing comfort over truth. I didn't feel proud. I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd listened when my life stopped whispering and started asking for change. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the next thing to happen. I was already there. The months that followed were steady. I fell into a rhythm that belonged entirely to me. Work, my mom, small weekend trips, things I never allowed myself before because I was too busy trying to hold everything together. Now I held only what mattered. I started running again. Not for health, not for looks, for clarity. The morning air, the rhythm of my feet hitting pavement. It was the kind of meditation I hadn't known I needed. Every mile erased pieces of the tension I'd carried for years. One Saturday, I visited a local bookstore I hadn't stepped into in ages. I wandered the aisles slowly, letting my fingers brush over book spines. I picked up novels I'd read as a kid, some I'd promised myself I'd return to, some I'd never finished. I bought 3, walked out into the sunshine feeling lighter, carrying nothing more than paper and ink. I ran into an old friend that evening at a coffee shop. We hadn't spoken in years. We talked about life, mistakes, and unexpected turns. I laughed more in that hour than I had in months. It wasn't a forced laugh. It was the kind that comes from remembering who you were before someone else started deciding your happiness. At home, I started cooking more. Small things at first, scrambled eggs, roasted vegetables, grilled chicken. Then bigger things, homemade pasta, baked fish, bread from scratch. The kitchen became mine. No one's rules, no one's opinions. Just work and focus and quiet satisfaction. One night, as I sat on the porch after dinner, I thought about my ex-wife. About the voicemail. About the hotel charge. About all the silent moments that had added up to an ending. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel bitterness. Not even sadness. What I felt was clarity. Every betrayal, every lie, every absence had pointed me towards something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. That my life was mine to live, not hers to define. I realized then that I didn't need anyone to validate my choices. I didn't need explanations or apologies. I needed only the space to exist honestly and without compromise. That realization gave me a kind of freedom I hadn't imagined possible. The quiet, the solitude, the calm. It wasn't loneliness. It was relief. It was recovery. It was the first time I could see a future that belonged entirely to me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was starting again. Not from zero. Not with baggage. Just forward. Just me. Spring came, and with it, a sense of renewal I hadn't expected. The trees outside my window unfurled their leaves, bright and stubborn against the sky, and I felt a small spark of the same stubbornness in myself. Life wasn't waiting for me to catch up anymore. I was moving on my own schedule, and it felt good. I spent more time with my mom, helping her settle back into her apartment. We laughed about old memories, argued gently over small things like whether the blinds should be open or closed, and shared quiet moments of understanding that didn't need words. I realized I'd missed this connection while I'd been caught up in the illusions of a marriage that had already slipped away. Work had changed too. The new position gave me responsibilities I hadn't had before, and with them came confidence. I traveled, yes, but the trips were opportunities, not escapes. I learned to appreciate hotel rooms for what they were. Temporary spaces where I could think, plan, and rest before returning to a life that was truly mine. One evening, after a long day, I walked into the house and noticed how the light fell across the living room. Everything was exactly where I wanted it. Not perfect, not sterile, but mine. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching the sunset through the window. The quiet was comforting. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. I thought about the past, about the woman I had loved, about the betrayal, and about the decisions I had made. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel regret. I felt gratitude. For the lessons. For the clarity. For the chance to reclaim my life before it was too late. Late that night, I walked out to the porch again. The neighborhood was quiet, the sky deep and clear. I breathed in the air, the kind that smells like possibility and endings all at once. I knew I had done the right thing. Not because anyone else would understand it, but because it was right for me. I was no longer waiting for someone else to make me whole. I was already complete. And for the first time in years, I could look at my reflection in the window and see a man who had been tested, who had faced truth without fear, and who had emerged calm, steady, and unbroken. The past had its place, but it no longer dictated my steps. My future was mine to shape, my life mine to live. And I would do so quietly, intentionally, and with the knowledge that the strongest love I would ever know was the one I had for myself. I smiled, sipped my coffee, and let the night stretch on, knowing I had finally arrived.